So I'm supposed to be talking about strategy, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. They told me I was supposed to come and talk about strategy. It's like, oh shit, not strategy. I hate talking about strategy. So I was like, what do I talk about strategy? And I thought, you know, I'll just talk about how I hate talking about strategy and why, and maybe that'd be useful, right? I don't know. There's so many reasons I don't like talking about strategy in the corporate context. The way it's usually done, I don't get. I mean, it just doesn't seem to add that much value to me, and what little value it does add, it seems like it's wrapped up in all this ritual that does little to nothing. And it's often a crutch for like lack of other things that seem far, far more important, right? Like I see strategy, strategic planning in general in companies today used to help people get clear on like, okay, what couple of projects to work on, but why don't we just all have good GTD practices? If you're not familiar with GTD, it's getting things done. It's individual organization, you know, organizing yourself. Often I think strategy is a crutch for lack of like really good individual organization and the ability to like track and juggle many projects and figure out what's most important and align with, you know, whatever broader initiatives are there. It's, you know, if you can't handle, if you don't have a lot of people that can really juggle multiple projects and lots of different work streams, then okay, come up with a strategic plan, at least I can focus on something. Right? Then there's the fact that strategy is often done in this predictive context, where it's like, let's predict the future. Let's predict where we should be, you know, years from now, and then break down a plan to get there. And it's, you know, what reality do we live in that is certain enough to actually come up with a clear breakdown of where we should be in years? You know, it's self-delusion at best, which I guess is the value of it. Sometimes it's really nice to feel this like illusion of control, this illusion that we've done good work, we're the smart executives, we've figured out our plan and how to get there, right? I don't know. So, you know, this predictive context and then worse, then we use it to drive things that really impact people, like their compensation and stuff. We say, here are your targets, and we're gonna pay you based on whether you hit these targets that are total made-up number theater from some top-down design process that presumes we can actually figure out what a good result even is. And then you end up with people not paid because they didn't hit a target that was totally either irrelevant or worse, was the wrong thing to do in the first place. You know, and then you get people stuck in this, do I actually adapt and do what's best for the business and its customers? Or do I hit the target that's gonna give me my pay? What a shitty position to put people in, you know? Or you pay somebody that just happens to hit the target by making all the wrong decisions along the way, and it was just an easy thing with the way reality unfolded, and I don't know, the whole thing sets up just a terribly unfair situation in my life. What I would love to see is a world where we don't pay people based on upfront targets at all. We get rid of all of that kind of incentive compensation type of targets. I'd love to see a world where we get rid of the top-down strategic planning and say, like, let's not have an illusion that we should be able to predict the future and control everything for that. Let's recognize that we live in a world of vastly more uncertainty today than those approaches actually acknowledge or deal with. You know, the uncertainty is sky high, and instead shift to something different, right? Like, what do we do to, quote, plan without a predictive upfront plan of where we're gonna go? What do we do to benefit from some wisdom of stepping back and looking at the big picture? I think that could be really useful, without all of the artifacts that we then get stuck on and that are self-delusional, right? And invite us to stop paying attention to reality and start paying attention to the plan. You know, and I don't have all the answers to that, but that's what I'd love to see. What's built into Holacracy, that I guess you all know what that is, at least a little bit, or you wouldn't be here, right? But what's built into Holacracy is the concept of a strategy, which is defined as a heuristic or a rule of thumb. In other words, not a goal, not a target, not a plan, really, but a rule of thumb. Right? Something like, you know, let's focus on customer service even over profitability right now. Or let's focus on optimization even over innovation, or innovation over optimization. I don't know. Right? the value of something like that is you can like distill this thinking into a rule of thumb that doesn't presume to know how everyone's going to apply it. It doesn't presume to know exactly what fork in the road you're going to take, but gives you a tool so that when you hit a fork in the road, you can benefit from the upfront wisdom that we put into the planning process. So that's some of how I do strategy in my company. We do step back. We look at the big picture. We look at the context. Right? What are all the systems around us? What's the context of our environment right now? What's happening? What's going on? And then from that, what do we need to really focus on? What do we emphasize? What's important for now? But instead of trying to figure out exactly what to do with that, we figure out what are the guidelines, the rules of thumb, the heuristics, the strategies, as we call them. And these are lightweight, nimble, agile strategies that people can apply when they hit the actual circumstances using their own judgment. And pay has nothing to do with any of that. Right? So, yeah, let me pause there. That's my rant about strategy and why I don't like it. I don't like talking about it either. I don't know. The way I see it done so often is like, really? Is that really adding a lot of value? Or if it is, keep the part of it that's adding value, but look at all the waste in it. Look at all the delusion. I don't know. So, questions. How about that? Anyone have something you want me to speak to or say or talk about around this? Right there.
Just free?
I can hear you.
Okay. I understand what you say about the strategy and not liking it, but the other side of it would be for me that people just do something in order to help the purpose, but it can really help also other roles know strategy in order to fulfill the purpose. So, like, do you vote for no strategy at all, or the heuristics, as you say, so, but also like, for example, a shorter term strategy to come towards something? How do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe. And this is one of the reasons I don't like talking about it. I don't know. Right? Like, I just know what doesn't work and what I don't like. And I've tried other things. The heuristic thing can give you some of that benefit, right? Purpose is hard. It's so broad, and there's so many things we could do. And if everyone's doing something completely different for the purpose, you don't get the alignment and the synergy from different people working together. So that's where I think a heuristic can be a breakdown, right, of that. Like, for a while in HolacracyOne recently, we were really focusing on how do we innovate new product offerings instead of continuing to optimize our current offerings. In other words, what new trainings do our market want that we're not covering right now? What other new tools does our market want that we're not covering right now? And we said, everyone focus on that as best you can in your roles. And what that did is, before that, some people were optimizing current offerings, some were creating new ones, some were just focusing on other parts of the business entirely. And this kind of put everyone aligned with, all right, right now we want to experiment with new offerings. And so then we got that alignment, right? So that's one way we've gotten that. I've seen that done. I've seen the goal thing work too, but it takes holding goals really differently. So I'm really hesitant around goals just because I see how they're often interpreted and used, and then people judge others based on. This is another thing that drives me nuts. I see so often in companies today, people are measuring based on the results people achieve. Performance management or whatever is done based on results. That's a terrible idea. Results are outside somebody's direct control, at least to some degree. Your results have a lot of variables that go into them, and not all of them are under your direct control. Don't hold people accountable for results. Hold them accountable for the things that are completely under their control, which means their decisions and judgment along the way to get to the results. Right? That's entirely under somebody's control. You can use really bad judgment and still get lucky and get good results. Right? Or you could use really bad judgment, really good judgment and get really unlucky, or just have other variables outside your control and get shitty results. You set up a very political system when you tell people they're going to be held accountable for certain results or targets. It's a horrible setup, and it hurts culture, it hurts people. I'd much rather see us hold people accountable for their decision making and their judgment along the way. That's where, if you want to really measure somebody, do it based on that. So that's one of my concerns with goals that can really easily get into judgment. People get stuck with this idea that you should be able to get that goal, which we can never know in advance if that goal is reasonable or not. We can only know after the fact by looking at all the facts and the judgment and all that along the way, and even then we can barely know. So, but that said, I've seen a good use of goals, right? I think you can hold them really well, which is just like I have a partner that does this. She one of my partners in HolacracyOne will regularly come up with goals for herself, right? And she loves working on teams that have concrete future goals, but the way she holds them are like, they're just things to motivate her. I mean, it's like, if you in your personal life were like, I want to run a mile today or whatever, you don't worry about somebody like judging you and punishing you for not doing that. You don't tell yourself there's something horribly wrong if, you get busy and you prioritize something else. So that I can see as a really useful way of like organizing a team around a goal if you hold it that way. This is just a fiction. It's a fabrication, a story. It doesn't really matter. It's there just to give us a focal point and something to rally around and have fun with. If you treat it like a game, right, without much stakes, no one's getting punished for this. It's just a game. We're gonna choose this goal. Let's go for it. We have a goal every time we play a game, and that can be really fun. So I've seen that really work for some teams. Yeah.
So you've seen a lot.
I have a mic. Is that better? So you've said a lot of things about strategy, and especially about appalling strategy, which for me they really resonate about bad planning, bad goal setting, bad payment schemes. And I see a lot of young, growing organizations from the inside, and it reminds me of something that they always say, and that is that they hate talking about organizations and how to organize a company, because there's so much bad practice going on there as well. And the thing that comes into my mind when I'm listening to you talk about this is you absolutely talk about how to organize. That's what Holacracy is all about. How do you organize a big group of people? And what I tell these young people in young companies is, well, the fact that there's a lot of people saying really dumb stuff about this doesn't mean that it's not a very important topic. There's smart things to think about it. So start looking for something more intelligent. And I can't help hearing the same thing coming from you, where you're talking about as a reason not to talk about strategy.
Well, let me be clear. I really think we do need to do something instead. I mean, I'm the first one to say with the organizational stuff, it's not enough to say what doesn't work and throw it out. The question is, what do you replace it with? So to the previous point I didn't answer, I definitely don't advocate ignoring strategy. The question is, what do you do instead? And that's where I don't have all the answers. I've had my experiments with heuristics, and I've seen some really cool success. I've seen other companies organize around goals, but then held in a completely different way. And I've seen that be really, really cool and work really well. So I don't have a universal answer, but I totally agree with you. Don't just throw it out and ignore it.
Well, my question here was, what have you come across so far that might help make up a useful definition of strategy, something that does help an organization do better things?
Yeah, no, I don't know.
What have you come across so far?
Not much, and this is one of the reasons I don't like this topic. I'm like, damn it, I want an answer to this, and I don't have it yet. But I'm tempted to start distilling down, well, what are the principles that a good approach might honor, right? And I don't know, but one that comes to mind is you don't tie any kind of compensation to it, right? I've covered that, that's one. Another one is it's not based on predicting where we should be and judging against it in any way, right? Another is it works with uncertainty instead of trying to resist or fight uncertainty with a predictive plan, right? That's another one. I haven't seen many approaches that work with all of those. I've seen some sometimes, but it's different. Like the whole OKR movement, right? I've seen sometimes that can be done in a way that seems like it honors those principles and adds lots of value. And I've heard stories from people I trust that tell me that really works for them. But I've also seen it done in ways that violate those principles and that seem like they don't work, you know? Even the heuristic approach I advertise, sometimes people totally twist that and go into a different place with that feels like it's off. So I don't know. I wish I had a universal answer. I think what I've got more are just principles.
Well, maybe that is part of getting to an answer, though, as a first step. That would it be fair to say that you're saying that whatever your strategy is, whatever your approach to strategy is, it needs to fit the purpose of the organization, but it also needs to fit certain principles in the way you want to run an organization.
Yeah, I think so. That's great. I've never articulated it this way. Thank you. That's really cool. Yeah, maybe my next step is to actually start writing down, here are the principles, right? That a good approach to strategic planning that is aligned with this new paradigm of organization that I tend to be swimming in, right? It would meet these principles, whatever the approach is.
So we both made some progress today.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah, please.
Mike. Oh,
Here, use mine.
I already have one. So I was wondering because I noticed if I talk to people who don't know anything about this kind of organization, it's really hard to convince them that targets, for example, do something weird. So I was wondering if you have some tips how to get into a useful conversation with people who are not familiar with holacracy or something similar.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. I've run into that myself. I wish I had a better answer for you. My approach has been, don't try on that topic specifically, but instead show them a glimpse of a completely new paradigm, right? So what I do is show them a glimpse of holacracy itself, or a completely new self-organizing paradigm, without talking specifically about targets. When you start talking about getting rid of targets, people freak out, right? Even more, holacracy says, don't even try to have commitments to deadlines. There's an alternative approach. When people hear that, they think chaos and like no way of controlling anything, right? But the thing is, it's replaced with something different in holacracy. In holacracy, you don't give somebody commitments like, yes, I'll do that for you by next Wednesday. That doesn't happen. But there's an alternative instead that tends to work even better. But as soon as I tell people, no, you don't have commitment promises that you organize around, it freaks people out. So first, what I try to do is dodge those questions and just give them a glimpse of what a self-organizing system really feels like, looks like. Then come back to those topics, right? Then go to, well, now let's talk about how do you deal with deadlines? Right? Well, if you give just commitments and you are in that habit, then you have people organizing around meeting their commitments so they look good, even when that's not the most important thing for the business, which is the same problem with targets. You have people organizing around hitting the targets, even when that's not the most important thing for the business. And then you have people incentivized to play politics to look good, to protect their reputation, instead of spending that energy driving the business forward, right? I can hit that conversation, and then I can show them an alternative. And if they've already tasted, wow, this whole system of holacracy seems like it's different, it's counterintuitive, but it works, then there's more openness when I start talking about other approaches to deadlines or other approaches to, strategic planning or targets or whatever. So that's my approach. It doesn't directly answer that question, but I don't want to get into that with somebody new to this. I don't want to try to convince them around any of that. And if I did, in the rare cases where I go there directly, I look for what they already know, right? I don't try to convince them of anything. As soon as I'm pushing somebody to convince them, I'm just raising their skepticism to the max. Who wants to be convinced? Who wants to have somebody else reaching in and saying, you're thinking wrong, let me fix that for you, right? So instead, I look at, well, what's not working for them? Where are they struggling with? Or I just show them what I'm excited about. Here's why I'm really excited about the way holacracy helps us with deadlines, because I think deadlines are important, and I think I have a better way to hit them than what we do in conventional companies, right? And then I get curiosity instead of skepticism. Right? And then before I know it, the person is convinced themselves that they don't need targets or they don't need commitments to deadline, date commitments, and things like that. So I want that. I want them to convince themselves. I just want to share my excitement, share a glimpse or a vision of something. And as soon as I feel like I'm in a debate with them about it, I've done something wrong, and I'm not going to get anywhere in all that.
So then I'm just wondering, do you actually have relations or maybe customers who are corporates and do their strategic planning in an ordinary way and ask you, can we use this holacracy approach for strategy? Do you actually have these relations?
We do have customers that when they start with us, they're doing very conventional approaches to lots of things, right? To strategic planning, to compensation. So one of the challenges when a company adopts holacracy, you can't change everything all at once. So we tend to focus on, let's change the core operating system, as I call it. Holacracy itself is a meta layer that says, here's how we're going to change everything else, right? So, and that's what you can think of holacracy. It's a self-management framework. It's not telling you how to do any of the other processes. It's not telling you how to do strategic planning necessarily. It's not telling you how to do compensation. It's not giving you an alternative to any of that. It's giving you the meta framework to decide all that other stuff and change it. So hold on, let me just point out. So when we get a customer that does have those conventional approaches, we first put in place holacracy, and then we say, what tensions do you have with all these other approaches? Where is your approach starting to not work? I have one customer that did very conventional strategic planning, and the CEO was kind of attached to it. But he loved Holacracy, wanted to bring that in, so he did. And then tension started coming up. People started saying, you know, these strategic plans we do in this old way, but then it seems like we adapt around them, we change roles, it doesn't make sense anymore, but people's pay are still tied to them, right? And then the pressure starts mounting to find a better approach. What Holacracy did is just make that pain more visible, right? If I had pushed it directly myself, I would have gotten a no, I'm pretty sure, right up front. So we let them feel the pain. When they feel the tension, then hey, can we help you solve it?
So now, well, I'm now having a sales perspective here. So now you have a customer, you do Holacracy, they feel the pain of the strategic planning, but do I hear you right if you don't have really an answer to a Holacracy strategic way of planning?
Yeah, no, Holacracy has almost no built-in canned processes for the specific business processes that you need. It has no approach to compensation, nothing for hiring, firing, budgeting, planning, none of that. It's just the meta layer that lets all those other things be flexible. So the question I often turn around, have you ever had any tension about the way your company does strategic planning? Have you ever had any tension about the way your company does budgeting? You know, or firing, or pay, or anything? Do you have anywhere you can go to rapidly and reliably process that tension into meaningful change to the process? In most companies, good luck changing any of those things. Right? All Holacracy is doing is giving you the layer that makes it easy to change those other things. It's not giving you answers. It's saying now when you have tension about your strategic planning approach, whatever it is, here's your way of evolving it. Right? And that said, there's lots of companies doing Holacracy. You can go ask them, ask Springist, how do you guys do strategic planning? I bet they have a way that's actually pretty compatible with an agile approach, right? I bet it's pretty good, you know? So ask them, and maybe you start there. Or go to one of the other 1,000-some companies out there doing Holacracy. Now, some of them might be, you know, good enough. Some of them might work for them, but not for others. But there's a whole wealth, a library out there of approaches. Same thing with all those others. And the beauty is, because Holacracy helps you evolve things, the approaches are getting better and better and better with time. Right? Like I mentioned this in our training today. At my company, we have a firing process. And I can genuinely say, I love how we fire people. Right? How many companies can say, I love how we fire people? You know? And the reason we have that is not because Holacracy gave us, here's the one right way to fire people, and it's great. Right? The reason we have that is 5 years ago, or 6, 7 years ago, we had to fire somebody. We had no real good way to do it, and it sucked. It felt awful. And afterwards, somebody said, well, that sucked, and it had all sorts of side effects and harm, and here's some tensions, and then they proposed some changes to our firing process, and it got better. A little later, we had to fire somebody else, and it sucked less. And then we proposed some more changes, and it got better. Fast forward over 5 years, and we now have a firing process that is so humane. It treats people so respectfully. We've had people go through that process and in the middle of it say, you know what? I trust this process, even if it results in me fired. And I feel grateful for the opportunity to go through it. We've had people fired who came back to be our customers, right? Who stayed close personal friends with the people involved in making that decision. And we didn't get there magically. We got there by iterating and iterating and iterating, right? And now we have that process that others can steal and take and start from there and iterate it yourself. And I hope we'll have the same for strategic planning at some point. It hasn't been as big of a need for us, maybe because we're small, I don't know. But maybe with another 5 years of iteration, we'll have an approach to strategic planning. Or if it's not us, maybe it's Springist, maybe it's another organization here, Spindle, somebody else, that iterates and keeps updating and changing and evolving. To me, that's the real promise of this. It's not the canned answers we get. It's the evolutionary process that lets us experiment and then lets a community start learning from each other and seeing, how are you doing it? Right? Our governance records are public, so people can go in and see all of our processes and copy them and fork them and do it themselves a different way and tell us what they learned. And, you know, I want to see a world where all these self-managed companies have this common language like Holacracy to share their approach to all these processes so that we can learn really good standard ways of doing any of these things.
Yeah. So how do we?
I have a mic for you. Let's take this as the last question.
So how do we deploy at department level if you don't have buy-in at the exec level?
Holacracy itself?
Yeah, and all the philosophies around it.
Yeah. It's really hard to deploy a homegrown approach to self-management at a department level. It's usually a little too much. I think it's easier with something like Holacracy because it gives you a framework, and you can start with that, and it lets you translate a little more easily to the broader world around your department. So that's a longer answer than I can fully answer now. It starts with somebody who has power over that department saying, I'm going to adopt it in my department. And they adopt the rule set of Holacracy. Usually they get a taste of it first. They'll, us and some of our licensees will go in and do a little 2-day workshop to get them a direct experiential taste of this. And then they say, yes, this is now the rule set for our department. And they go. They start where they are and they go. And then they have to navigate the broader company's processes that are forced on them. And that gets interesting. So this has happened, there was a department in Washington state government that did this. Talk about broader policies around you. They had an approach to strategic planning and everything else mandated from the top that was so incompatible with a self-management approach. So they kind of translate as best they can, or they ignore strategically and do it their own way and then make it look like what the rest of the world needs to see, right? They created a role at one point. They had laws, literally, that you had to have somebody with a certain job title to sign certain documents, right? Even though they wanted to put that in other roles that really knew better anyway. So they created a role, signer, and they put somebody in that role that had that job title, right? And his whole accountability was signing anything presented to him when it came from the due authority of another role. And that's what he did, and it met the legal requirement. Now, maybe not the spirit of the law, but it was within their risk tolerance, it worked for them, and it let them be more self-managing, right? So you find the approaches like that present the image you need to the broader world. And ideally get a good coach, because it's hard to adopt in a department. It's actually harder than adopting across the whole company. Cool. Hope that was useful.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
Cool.
much.